one of the things that I noticed on when I watched it on the video was that these microphones, you need to switch them on and then the camera comes to you, because there was lots of instances where people were talking and I could see mouths moving and hands gesturing, but I couldn't hear a word what they were saying. So it's really just our own discipline on those things, and I'm probably as bad as everybody else on it. So starting off then, apologies for absence, please.
I've just given apologies to Nicola Graham, please.
Okay, thank you. Declarations of interest.
As and when, Chair.
As and when, thank you. The minutes of the previous meeting then. Has everyone got a copy of those? Okay, if we could go through those.
Can we take them as read, Chair?
Yeah, unless anybody's got a particular comment to make on them. No?
No? Good meeting.
Chairman, if that is on, isn't it? Yeah, that is on. Just a couple of things, because we're live streaming. If people could get into the habit, the first time they speak, if they could just introduce who they are for members of the public who are watching us. So I'm Robert Tranter, the Monitoring Officer here at Monmouthshire County Council. And Chairman, all I was going to say was in respect of the dispensations that were granted by this committee in respect of Roggett Community Council. I circulated an email from the clerk that you all would have seen. So that is a good news story, really, I think. And even better for the community council is I think they're now up to a very healthy 7 community councillors. So someone else has come forward, which is great. And let's hope that more people from that community come forward and get up to their maximum of 11 members. But in fairness to the clerk, she sent me the minutes of the meeting. I forwarded those on. Did exactly the right thing, i.e. those members declared their personal interests and didn't vote on their respective spouses' application to become part of the members. Of the community council. So just by way of update, as I say, that's a good news story, and Roggett Community Council are now very much up and running, which is good.
Okay, thank you for that, Rob.
Okay.
So, okay, the next item on the agenda then is council training records. So over to you, Rob, on that.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think this was a report that you requested on behalf of the Standards Committee to just get an idea, really, of the training that the council undertakes. And it's probably a good time to ask that question, because we've got several new members on the county council. Indeed, we're up to about a third of our members this time around, so since May, are new members. And I think that's very healthy, fresh input of people. I think it's good. But that then also makes it very, very important that the council provides the training and relevant training at that for the members of the new council. And in that regard, my colleague John Pearson is here today. So John has kindly put together the statistics that accompany my report, and if members have any questions, then I'm sure that John will try his best to answer those questions. And indeed, one of the questions may be that we've gone through quite an intense induction programme here, as members will see at the start of the new council, and it'll be quite interesting to see what plans the council has now for training in the future, and what sort of training regime is envisaged. So the report is there, Chairman, and as I say, the statistics are there. I did send through Nicola a further table of statistics that John kindly put together for me, and that table includes the type of training, the date the training was given, the target members, so how many members were invited, how many members attended, the proportion of new members and the proportion of returning members. So I think very, very useful pieces of information. And I must admit there is a rather a large variance, I think, of attendance. I think there's 100% attendance for some training sessions, but then only 14% on others. And there could well be reasons, good reasons, that why that attendance was low. Possibly another meeting was taking place that day. But members will see there's a full range of training that's offered by the council. So, for example, looking at we've provided licensing committee training on the 23rd of May. 43 members were invited, but clearly that training is targeted at the licensing committee members. Licensing committee has 12 members. And indeed 13 attended. Similarly, with planning committee, again, all 43 members were invited, but predominantly that's for planning committee members, and we've got 16 members on the council, although only 15 places are taken up, and 16 members attended that training. So there's an important one there, corporate parenting training on the 4th of July. That was poorly attended, and that's an important responsibility for the council, and no doubt further training will be provided on that. So, Chairman, I've put the report together, and it's pretty self-explanatory. There are, as I say, lots of useful statistics there. So if members have any questions on that, then quite happy to take that and take those questions. And indeed, my colleague John, as I've said, is also here today to take any questions and perhaps explain what future plans we've got on the training front for our members. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Rob. Yes, just one question from me to start off. Looking at the list, I noticed about code of conduct training. Is that the second one down? Decision making, ethics and standards, code of conduct. Yeah. And 74% of attendance on that. So really, we should be looking at 100% for that. So what happens now? Do you chase the ones who don't attend?
Yeah. Yes, Chairman. What will happen is that I'll provide another session in due course for those members that didn't attend. The good thing for me, looking at the table of members that attended, is that 14 new members attended. So most, if not all, of our new members attended that session. In saying that, I think it's always useful for members to have refresher training on the code, and I will arrange now for those other members, because we know they are That's perhaps sounds too sinister, but we know that the members, we know the names of those who didn't attend, and we'll organise a further training session for those members. On that front, Chairman, you may like to know that I carried out 2 sessions back in May for town and community councils, one in Caldicot and one in Abergavenny. And about 3 weeks ago, I attended a mopping up session, if you like, here, where we had, I think it was quite well attended actually. We had about 15, 20 community town councillors who attended here in Usk for a further session. Those members who didn't make the sessions in May. So once again, that's good. And further down the line, again, I'll offer town and community councillors further sessions. I'll liaise with the clerks. And in fairness to the clerks, I've got a good relationship with them. They will undoubtedly get in touch with me if they feel that there is a member or some members on their respective councils who really do need training on the code. So again, we will cover that training off, I'm confident.
Okay, thank you for that, Rob. Questions? Richard.
Hello, yes, I'm Richard Stowe, an independent member, and it's really following on from Trevor's question about the coverage of Code of Conduct training, and we maybe mentioned it before, is have you considered now, you've been through the big face-to-face sessions, doing webinars or doing online training that people could attend by logging in remotely and can still, using the software, still submit questions and get answers, and also the webinars can be recorded. So even if you miss the live webinar, you can go back afterwards and watch through it and watch through the questions. So I wonder whether that's been considered. Now you've done, obviously face-to-face is better, but given you've done 2 or 3 sessions with county councillors and community councillors, perhaps the next step could be to try a webinar and publicise it. It does mean people don't have to travel from extreme parts of the county.
So for the induction programme following the elections, through the WLGA, all the local authorities drafted sort of a template programme so that councillors throughout Wales are going to receive a similar level of training on similar topics, which makes sense, and then you add in your tailored sessions then as we go along. The issues we faced coming up to the elections, obviously we're making a lot of assumptions. We don't know what the makeup of the council is going to be. Like Rob said, we had 16 new members, so 37% of our councillors are new following the elections. Webinars are great, but what are the IT capabilities of some of the new members? What sort of IT training do they need before we come into that? How can we fit in the amount of training that we need to deliver before the relevant meetings start? And feedback from the last induction was that it was too much too soon. It was all too heavy at the start. Sometimes we just can't get around that, but that's the feedback. We tried to take that into consideration as well. And you could throw the general election into the mix. That could have obviously affected attendance at some meetings because some of them are party workers and they've only just been elected. But what we did do was we drafted the programme, then went through the Democratic Services Committee for them to agree and give us feedback on. Every candidate at the election was given all the dates and the timetables of the induction programme, so they knew when they were expected to be coming in. We looked at doing certain elements of online training, just for some standard stuff. That's through the All Wales Academy, so the NHS use it, local authorities use it. It wasn't developed enough in time for the election, unfortunately, and it wasn't really easy for members to navigate. So we scrapped that idea, but it's something we're still looking at. What we did manage to do was we created an area for councillors on the intranet, which is their own homepage. It's got a library full of guidance from the WLGA, our own guidance, so how to be a councillor, chairing meetings, dealing with casework, the code of conduct's on there, social media guidance, that's all on there. Video libraries, so we have recorded a lot of the induction sessions, and we've put those on the hub for people to go back to. The code of conduct is a bit of a long session, so we're trying to get that, work around the logistics of getting that up on there, but it will be, or we at least have the recording to share around if we need to. We tried to time the induction and training sessions so that they were relevant for the meeting, so we'd have audit training in the morning, audit meeting in the afternoon, just to try and make sense for people to come in for the day. And we also had, we got 8 cabinet members, and I think 3 are only existing councillors. So we had to put some specialist training on for new cabinet members as well pretty quickly. We've taken the induction programme back to Democratic Services Committee, and the feedback has been positive. Some members liked the full day session, some didn't, some preferred it split up. Still concerns about too much too soon, but we just can't get around that, unfortunately. We got to get the code of conduct training in, we got to get the licensing training in, because we could have a licensing application that the committee's got to consider within a couple of days. So there's things like that we just can't get around, unfortunately. Like I say, we have recorded all the sessions. Remote attendance is something that's come up now, and that's sort of technology we're looking at for future sessions, but it's just not ready at the minute. And we've given everybody easy IT equipment. Everyone's got the same, all easy access to the intranet, like you say, where we've set up those areas for people to go to. But going forward, there's another training session for councillors on the 5th of December on the role of a councillor in a modern council. That'll be repeated in January as well. We're continuing to do IT workshops for members to upskill them in their IT skills, so we can look at those sort of remote attendance sessions. And we'll look at doing an evaluation and getting some feedback from all members once they've settled into their roles on how they want to develop their training going forward. I think we're still too early for a lot of the new members that we've got to be able to say, how was the training session for you, when they're still really 3 months into their role and need to understand what the role is before they can give us some proper feedback. So yeah, that's pretty much what we did, how we did it, and where we are now. So again, any questions?
Thank you for that, John. Any questions on that?
Thank you, Chair. You know, it's more of a comment really than a question, but I personally feel that the training that we had, whilst it was excellent, it wasn't basic enough to begin with. I'll just give you one example, and I've been a councillor before, so I've worked on another council and can compare the training there. I really struggle to know where's what in this building. And we weren't really taken round and shown where everything was in the building. And, you know, something as fundamental as that, I'm still really struggling with it. I think also some of the training needed to be more basic. You don't have any training to be a councillor. You're elected. It's a bit like being a parent. There's not a lot of training out there to be a parent. And, you know, I'm sure that some of the new councillors are really struggling with what should be my main objectives. What should I really be trying to achieve in the first 6 months, in the first year? Because, you know, it's very daunting for people to be thrust into this role, and you know, you think you're ready for it, and when you actually start, it's an absolute minefield. I would also, you know, I really am pleased to see the training that you've put in place for the new year. I think that's really needed. And certainly as a chair of a scrutiny, I think chairs need ongoing training. I mean, many years ago, I attended a course in London which was a week long, and the course was called Chairing and Attending Meetings. And, you know, you cannot underestimate you know, the fact that we need continual scrutiny ourselves. We've got this brilliant tool now where it's all recorded, and I would really welcome, you know, sitting down and being told, well, this is what you need to improve, you need to sum up more, or you need to do this more. That would be really helpful. So I'm hoping that we may get that when we have this training in the new year. Other things that would be helpful, my daughter works in the Treasury, and she's just been on a speed reading course. Now, reading through the Constitution for this meeting, you've got nearly 400 pages. You know, we need help on how to make effective use of our time. So I would really like if you could perhaps come back to councillors, and perhaps we could all give you some input on what we feel are our areas of skills that are lacking. That would be really helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, and some very, very good points there. So,
I can come back on, and I think it comes down to we can never please everybody. You know, like you say, you attended a week-long training session. Some members we can't even get in for half a day. So we've got to try and find that balance. On terms of some of the information not being basic enough, one of the County Hall tour was obviously one of the things that was picked up. But we did then put on a bus tour around the county so that members could go and find where people are based. We did ask for a plan of where everybody's based that we could give to members. All the services are based, but it's changing so often that it just becoming out of date straight away. The basic information, I think that's why we tried to create the library on the intranet and put those basic WLJ chairing guidance booklets on there and breaking it down into various aspects. Because one of the things we've been asked for is, like say, people being able to do it in their own time and having the online training. The online training wasn't ready, but here's a library of documents you can read through in your own time that you can upskill over time. But definitely, that's like I said, in the new year, that's one of the things we'll be looking at is putting a review out once members understand what the role entails and what they need going forward. They can give us the feedback and we'll look at putting another programme together to encompass all that going forward.
Thank you. Sheila Woodhouse, member of Growfield Ward, Abergavenny. Just as a new member, just to add to what Jane said, that yes, a review would be good, evaluation would be good, because there are a lot of ideas, you know, amongst us. Now, we've been through the first 6 months. I don't want to sort of go into great depth here, but one example is you have a tool to survey members or anybody as to when they're available for meetings. And I think that would be very, very useful if you could use that to assess how many people are available to participate in a training session and give people notice. That's something, it's used occasionally, but I think if more use of that would be very, very helpful for your perspective as well. So you're not, running training sessions and not getting the attendance. And we would have some input as to when we are available. So that's just one example, but I think evaluation, similarly, if you could evaluate the use of the software, the computers, there are issues that we could all help with, pool our sort of common errors, common faults, so that we could have training with things we're not familiar with, and issues we've got with it with regard to using the equipment. Thank you.
thank you very much. John, do you wish to respond to that? Okay. Are there any other questions?
Yeah,
Sorry.
just an observation of what we've heard today. Do you send out a questionnaire following the training for people to highlight where they feel they need extra training or to make observations of where they felt the training fell short, like a tour of the building? I mean, that sounds basic, but it can be so easily overlooked. And I think a questionnaire to each of them, now they've undertaken some training, of where perhaps the training has fallen short.
We didn't do it during the induction programme, but I think we got 6 new councillors on the Democratic Services Committee, and they sort of fed back to us their experiences then. But all those things, like I say, we'll pick those up in the new year when we do the full review. What did we miss? What did we do good? what do we do bad, what do you need more of, and then we'll put the programme together then going forward. But because we knew it was going to come back to Democratic Services Committee, at the time, if the session's too detailed, then the feedback would be it's too detailed. But for some issues, you have to have that level of detail to be able to deliver the committee possibly the following day or the afternoon as we set it up. So it's a really fine balance that we're striking, but we'll pick all the evaluation up in the new year.
Just to assist the Chairman, John mentioned several times about the Democratic Services Committee, and training and resources for members is very much within the remit of that committee. So that's why John referred to on several occasions to the Democratic Services Committee.
Thank you for that, Rob. Are there any other questions? David?
Steve Evans, Town and County Councillor for West End Ward, Caldicot. There's a question for Rob. When I first come as a county councillor, and I put myself forward for different committees, I was told I could go on to them, but I had to have training before I went on to them committees. And I don't see that's happening at the moment. If somebody's elected to go on the committee, they go on to that committee without any training. And I think the training should be before you go and sit down. Because like you've got the standards, you've got licensing, you've got planning. There's serious decisions you're making there. And if you haven't got the knowledge prior to going on them committees, you know, you're putting yourself in an awkward position.
Yeah, if I can assist you there then through you, Chairman. With the examples of licensing and planning, certainly members of those committees will require training before they sit as members of that committee. And that's why you'll see then that on your list, the licensing committee training was done on the 23rd of May, the planning committee training done on the 30th of May. So those training sessions were put in place before the committee sat. So in respect of those two committees, certainly training is mandatory before the members sit and make decisions. And that must be right, frankly, on any number of levels. Some of this stuff is quite technical. Members need to get a grasp in order for them to make decisions.
There you go. Thank you for that, Rob. Are there any further questions? Yes.
Can I just make a comment about licensing? Because I sit on licensing, and if I'm totally honest, I did the training, but because of the nature of licensing in this council, and we don't have that many meetings, it means that what you've learnt, you're not actually putting into practice. So I think that's a bit of a worry. If I try to think back now to that training, I can't honestly say I really remember it, but on my previous council, I was sent up to London for a day to do licensing training, which was, you know, within a legal company, and I can remember every aspect of that training. So I think sometimes, you know, it's beneficial to be taken out of the place where you're usually at. And the other worry I'd like to say is not using that training, because the number of cases that we've had have been few and far between, and then you forget what you've learnt. So that is a worry of mine. Thank you.
Yeah, Chairman, perhaps I can help. Obviously, the council can't govern how many applications it has before it. It's just, you know, that's not within our gift, is it? But what I would suggest, if you do feel uncomfortable when an application comes before you as a committee, it's important that you tell the chairman that, and therefore it may be possible to get some refresher training in before the application is heard. But it is a difficulty. I totally appreciate. Whereas, for example, something like planning committee, we meet every month. We will always have planning applications. Perhaps often we have too many, frankly. But with licensing, it's a different matter. And I totally agree with you, Jane, that it is important that members have a grasp of their subject and feel comfortable in the decisions that they're making.
I suppose, Chair, if I may, what I'm really saying is that it's great to have the training, but it's an ongoing process. It doesn't stop there.
Thank you for that. One final question.
Richard McGonigal, independent member. It was just a question for John. I just wanted to pick on something you said at the beginning when you were talking about all the different things that you guys had done as part of the training. And you mentioned something that got abandoned. I think, was it something that had been made available at a national level, like some online, was it online training? Forgive me, would you just mind telling me what that was that got abandoned, as it were?
Yeah, so there's something called the All Wales Academy, which is an online sort of learning pool that the NHS, local authorities, Welsh Government use, and it goes through the training centres of those sort of organisations. It allows you to track when people logged on to do things, give them the certificates at the end of completing the modules, etc. What that would have been nice to have done is some of the basic information, let them log on to it and do some of the basic modules of the role of a counsellor, giving some experience as well from outgoing counsellors and things like that. But it wasn't a local authority driven. It was driven through the WLGA and the Welsh Government. It wasn't set up in time really for it to be effective enough for the election for the induction training. There was some modules on there, but as well, because they had to be registered through the local authority and go through the training departments, we didn't know who they were until after the election to set them up, to give them that access to that training early enough in the process. So it was abandoned. We thought it would cause us more headaches than it would benefit the members, which at the time they just, like they say, it's too much too soon, so why give them another headache? So we left that to one side, but it's certainly something we can pick up in the future.
Some of those, they do take quite a lot of bedding in. Some of those tools, they can be quite useful. There's a big cultural change, I think, to embracing them. But it was just an observation, really. So it's good to know that stuff is out there, but it obviously just needs a bit more time to bed in. Those online sort of e-learning tools can be useful for, especially for things like code of conduct training, getting people after they've had the training to almost do go on the e-learning tool to see how much they've actually retained. So there's a test with 20 questions, and if you don't pass a certain threshold, you have to retake the training or retake the test to get it right. And those are things I've seen used in work around anti-bribery and corruption, where you're trying to make sure there's 1,000 people have understood the ins and outs of the policy, and then you get them to take a test so you know who's read it and who hasn't read it and who's got it and who hasn't got it. And it's just that those are useful tools, but they don't just click overnight. They take quite a lot of bedding in. Appreciate it. So.
Okay.
Can I just... Irene Cameron, Community Council. We need training. I forgot to say that last time. I noticed on the duties of this committee, one of the duties were, and K, ensuring that the council's whistleblowing procedures operate effectively. How are we doing that? Thank you.
Yeah, well, I've done a report recently, if not last committee, it was at the committee meeting before, because the whistleblowing policy has changed. And the biggest change is that it's now a universal policy, if you like, so it covers schools and the council. And I think I also gave you up-to-date figures for the number of whistleblowing cases that we've had. So that's the way that this council, if you like, and you're quite right, Maureen, it is within the remit of this committee to look at that. So that's how we've dealt with those that aspect of the committee's responsibilities. So yeah, that's what we've done. And indeed, you'll see the whistleblowing policy, the new whistleblowing policy, is now in the Constitution, which we'll look at doing the next report. So that's the way it's that's the way it's done.
Okay, thank you very much for your questions on that one, and thank you very much to John for your informed response. So if we can move on now to the next item on the agenda, which is Constitution update.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Apologies for the rather large document which accompanied this report, but I suppose that's the nature, really, of a constitution, and all councils have to have a constitution. All the principal councils, so the 22 authorities in Wales, have to have a written constitution, and they need to include certain matters that I've listed for you in the report, and clearly the constitution of this council, which again is certainly not unique and is typical, rather. The constitution contains lots and lots of different documents, different policies. What I was proposing to do today, Chairman, may take a bit of time, but I'm obviously subject to what your instructions are. But I was going to take you through some of the changes that we've done, and that the council will consider in its meeting in December. Because don't forget, the rule is the constitution belongs to the council, and it's for the council to adopt or amend any changes to the constitution. So the reason I brought it was to make sort of members of this committee aware of what's in the constitution. I think that's very, very useful. There are certain things that you will be very interested in the constitution. For example, the updated members' code of conduct is in it, the officer member protocol, the local protocol for dealing with member complaints. So those things are very much within your remit, and I thought it would be useful if members of this committee saw the constitution in all its glory. And it was a convenient time to bring this to you, because, as I say, next month, the full council, I'll bring a report to the full council for them, hopefully, to adopt the new constitution. The new constitution isn't greatly different from the previous one, and indeed the decisions that have been made over the last 3 years, and I say that in that, if you like, the old constitution or the current constitution was a gift from the last monitoring officer, Mr. Andrews. It was one of the last things he did. And over the subsequent 3 years since he's left us, the council's made various decisions that have affected the constitution. And now it's timely, if you like, that we, or I, pull together those changes and put it to the council for adoption at its meeting next month. So, Chairman, what I was proposing to do was to take you on a whistle-stop tour, really, through the Constitution, and perhaps explain then parts of it and aspects of it that perhaps it doesn't then become as daunting. You know, you don't then, you're not left with, oh, dear me, there's 400 pages, where do I start? So that was what I was going to do, and again, if you're happy for me to do that, or if members will consider that beneficial, then that's what I intend to do. But however, if members just want to ask me questions about it, I can, I'll go down that route also. I'm obviously in your whatever you want me to do.
Okay, thank you for that, Rob. I'm rather in favour of the guided tour, if everyone's on those lines. Okay, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. That's fine. So if we go to it'll be page 18 of the report. I'm looking at this sort of the electronic version, and if you go to the contents page, and I've set it up a little bit differently. This new constitution, and hopefully it'll be easier and less daunting to sort of navigate yourselves around it. The other reason I've sort of split it up is that because this is a living document, if you like, that the Constitution is always changing, really, because the Council is always making decisions that affect this document, and it's easier for me just to look in sort of one section. So, for example, Part 3, which I've headed up C, I can just change that bit without changing the whole document. One of John's colleagues, Wendy Bernard, has assisted me greatly in setting out this new constitution, and great thanks to her, because otherwise it would have taken me a lot longer than it has. So if we look at as I say, the contents page, in part 1's an introduction, part 2's the articles of the Constitution. So in there, for example, at Article 4, it'll tell you what the functions of the full council are. Article 5 talks about chairing the council. Article 6 talks about the select committees. 7, the executive, which is the cabinet. 8, the regulatory committees, which are the planning committee, for example, the licensing committee, the audit committee. Article 9, very important, the standards committee. Article 10, the area committees and their forums. Article 11, joint arrangements. 12, who the chief officers are within the council. 13, how we make decisions. 14, finance, contract and legal matters, etc., etc. So in part 2 of the Constitution, and those are headed up B pages, if you like, the articles are explained, and they're very useful in that they, if you like, they set the context of the various parts of the council. Then looking at part 3, which are the pages of C, we look at the scheme of delegation for the council. So the scheme of delegation, in a nutshell, is the ability of the council to make decisions quicker. So it gets around, for example, when a decision's required, every decision having to go before the cabinet member or the council. So the delegation, the decision-making ability is delegated to the officer. And that scheme of delegation explains in what circumstances officers are given powers to make decisions. Okay, that's been amended slightly in that we've got a new planning scheme of delegation. We've got some new titles for the chief officers, and they've got different responsibilities now. So I've had to take that on board. The next, very important, and students of the Constitution love this bit, in part 4, rules of procedure, so D pages onwards, in there are the standing orders. And the standing orders are, if you like, the rules that particularly the full council and committees abide by. Okay, so it sets out the way that we conduct debates, the way the members can ask questions, the way that members can explain things. Standing orders, very important. And in the standing orders, I'll come on to this in a bit, you will see that in there we've changed the ability of the council to remotely attend meetings. So that was done very, very recently by the council, decision made at this month's council, actually. So, and John has alluded to this, if the technology is able to do this, okay, the council will allow members to remotely attend meetings. So what that means is that some members will not actually physically have to be in this chamber during the meeting. Great in theory, but again, it's very, very technology dependent. And We will crack the technology, I've no doubt about it. But at the moment, there are a few sort of teething problems. So that's quite a big change that I've had to amend the standing orders. Also in the rules of procedure then are the access to information procedure rules, so when members are allowed to see things. And in this council, members can see all papers. Some councils adopt a policy whereby, for example, if you're not a member of that committee, that particular committee, you won't see the agenda. We do things slightly differently here, and members can see all reports. They can also see reports that are what we call on pink, so sensitive information that members of the press and public don't see. So all members, irrespective of whether or not they're on the committee, will be able to see those papers. Again, that isn't, I don't think, too controversial in that the Members' Code of Conduct protects against any potential leak, if you like, to the press, because that would be a clear breach of the code if a member did that. We've got the budget and policy framework procedure rules, the executive procedure rules, so the way the cabinet does its business, and indeed remote attendance is allowed at cabinet meetings as well. We've got the select committee procedure rules, financial procedure rules, contract procedure rules. Those are important, and again, those will be updated I think sometime next year, that's planned. So the contract procedure rules cover things like when the council procures goods and services. Okay, there are various processes that the council needs to go through in order to procure a particular service from someone. So, for example, depending upon the actual size of the contract, the council will need to take, for example, 3 quotes. If it's a large contract, it goes through a procurement framework that the Welsh Government runs. So they are important. Also within that section are the officer procedure rules. So turning next now to part 5, so pages E onwards, of particular relevance to this committee, lots of things in here. Clearly the Members' Code of Conduct is here, and we've got a new Code of Conduct now, or relatively recent Code of Conduct. We adopted it last May. So the new code, that code is now within the Constitution. There's also an Officers' Code of Conduct. There's a Scrutiny and Executive Protocol, and there's furthermore the member-officer relations, so the way that the interface between members and officers work. So if a member's got a complaint about an officer, how that's dealt with, and vice versa. And also we've got a protocol for the self-regulation of member conduct. And if you remember, that's to deal with low-level member complaints that the Ombudsman is very, very keen for councils to have in place, and indeed all principal councils now have such a protocol in place. Then we've got the schedule of members' remuneration. So John's kindly updated that for me. So that's bang up to date. So we've got all the new members in there, all the new co-opted members in there. So that's very useful. What isn't in this Constitution at the moment is the management structure, and I'm still waiting for that to be finalised. But we'll have a sort of hopefully quite a simple and readily understandable chart of who the chief officers are and what their responsibilities are. So that then is the way that the Constitution is set out. Throughout the document, you will see that I've highlighted in areas of green where I've made amendments to the Constitution. So what I propose to do is I'll just pick out some of those and explain the reasoning why I've changed it. So if we go to Article 2, and I'll talk now about page numbers on the Constitution. So it'll be 6B, so page 6B of the Constitution. You will see that at Article 2 I've had to amend election in terms of councillors. That's because the Welsh Government has changed the term of the terms that councillors now sit. It used to be 4 years. It's now 5 years. That may actually change at some point in the future because at the moment the general election and the council terms are due to clash. I think I'm right on that, John, aren't I? So, and they can't be held. Yep, there we are. John is also our election officer, so hot off the press on that one. But at the moment, we're down to serve for 5 years. So that's why that was that required amendment there.
Sorry, could I just...
Yeah, certainly.
Jane.
Sorry to interrupt. Can I just ask you about page 21? Because it was my understanding, as you've just said, that the Welsh Government have changed it. And it says here, the council is, on page 21, the council is comprised of 43 councils elected every 4 years except as otherwise directed by the Welsh Government. So that should say every 5 years, should it?
If it says every 4 years, yeah, it should say 5 years now, yeah. So thanks for that. Where was that? That was on...
Page 21, under how the council operates.
Right, okay. Yeah. It's not right, okay.
5-year term, I think they consulted on it now.
Right, okay.
And when they get their powers on elections, they intend to change it to 5 years.
Right.
So it was my understanding that it has actually come into effect, and in fact they could even extend it longer because they don't want to clash with the Assembly elections.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I double checked with my husband, who's an electoral expert.
Yeah, my understanding at the minute is the Welsh Assembly want, obviously, they're consulted on whether they should change it to 4 or 5 years, but they haven't, their delegated powers for amending their additional powers hasn't come into effect yet, so they haven't actually made that change. And like you say, there's still the issue of if it's at 4 years, it clashes with the Assembly elections. If it's at 5 years, then we've got a clash with the general election. And we haven't had a solution to either of those come through to us yet. So I don't actually think the change from 4 to 5 has come in as yet.
Perhaps then, Chairman, a good example of how this document is a living document and is never set in stone. Okay. I'll just carry on and pick out some of the bits that I think may be of interest to you. So, okay. If we go now to Article 4, the full council and the policy framework. Bit technical this, so this is on page 12B of the Constitution, or page 33 if you're looking at the electronic index. You may be aware that the way the Local Government Act 2000 amended the way councils operate, certain things the full council needs to do. Most other things the cabinet or the single cabinet member can do.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you give me the page on this scale?
Yeah, certainly. It's 12B of the Constitution.
12D.
Have you got that? 12B, yeah. Or page 33 if you're operating. Yeah, okay. So in green there, you'll see that policy framework. So that's the up-to-date list of the policies that the council has to make decisions on. Okay, so only the council can make decisions on those plans, and those plans comprise what we call the policy framework, and they include things like the major plans, for example, the corporate plan, the local development plan, the social services area plan, the well-being plan. So these plans must be adopted by the full council. The full council must take those decisions. And also the full council must set the council's budget. So the cabinet can't set the budget of the council. It must be the full council sets that budget. So there are certain decisions that the full council of Monmouthshire must make. If we go now down to 16B, okay, and we're looking at Article 6, select committees. The council last year made a decision to have 5 select committees. Up until last year, the council only had 4 select committees, but we've now got a 5th select committee, and if you scroll down that page slightly, you will see that there's now a select committee covering the Public Services Board. The Public Services Board is an important board, important decision-making body within the county, and the council now has a select committee comprising of the 4 select committee chairs and 5 other members to look at certain aspects of the Public Services Board. And you will see that I've given an outline of what the Public Services Service Board Select Committee will look at. So to review and scrutinise the decisions made or actions taken by the Public Services Board, to review and scrutinise the board's governance arrangements, to consider matters relating to the board, as the Welsh ministers may refer to it, etc., etc. So that's an important select committee, an important scrutiny committee that the council's now established. So the constitution's needed to be changed to take into account that change.
Can I ask Rob a question? Don't you think in this new select committee, the Democratic chair should be there as well?
It's not a decision for me, David, thankfully. That was a decision of the council, if you recall. The council considered the Public Services Select Committee last year, and its decision was that the 4 chairs and 5 other members would comprise it. So, yeah, that's the current state of play on that one. Perhaps I'll sidestep that one for another day. If we go now to Article 9, which is the Standards Committee, explaining what the Standards Committee is, who's on it. You'll see again I've changed the term of office for 5 years for the county councillors and the community member. I will need to check that again, bearing in mind what John and Jane have told me. But I've changed it to reflect the new 5-year term. Okay. If we go on to page 31B, and that's Article 12, officers. So in there, I have put the new officer titles in, the new chief officer titles in, and then new sort of areas of responsibility. So the changes are, we've now got a deputy chief executive, who was the former chief officer for innovation and enterprise, and we've also now got a chief officer for resources. So I've put those officer titles within the Constitution. And furthermore, the Chief Officer for Social Care and Health, who's a lady, Claire Marchant, she now has responsibility for regulatory services. So I've also put that within her remit. The next page, which is 33B, the Deputy Chief Executive is also the Head of Democratic Services. So there are various officers that the Council must have. So they must have a Head of Paid Service, they must have a Monitoring Officer, they must have a Chief Finance Officer, it's called a Section 151 Officer, and they must also have a Head of Democratic Services. And the current Head of Democratic Services is the Deputy Chief Executive. Article 13, I've just slightly amended principles of decision making just to take into account obviously an important act that the Welsh Government has passed, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act 2015. And in a nutshell, that act encourages councils, public bodies to take longer term decisions. Quite an interesting act, quite interesting from the point of view that politicians are normally elected for 5 years, but this act it's a mandatory duty on the councils now, public bodies, to take decisions and look at the longer term consequences for the decisions that they make. So I fitted that in to the new constitution. I'm going to go next now, Chairman, down to the standing orders part, and I'll get there in 2 ticks. Okay, so I am now down to on page D1. Okay, so page 1D 128 on the agenda. So the rules of procedure, standing orders. And as I explained a little bit earlier, these rules set out the way that the council conducts itself at full council and indeed meetings of the council. So very important the way sort of questions are asked, the way matters are debated, what's going to be debated, what goes on the agenda, who says what goes on the agenda. So quite important. And I've had to amend a couple of things within standing orders. So for example, standing order 8 on quorum. So the quorum for committees at this council is normally 1/4 of the whole members of the committee. So for example, full council, we're 43 members. So to be quorate, we need 11 members. But there are a couple of amendments to that. So for example, for a planning committee now, you must have at least 50% of the members present for the planning committee to be quorate. So we've got 16 members, so we need at least 8 members in attendance. In fairness, the planning committee members, it's a very well attended committee, so we always achieve that easily and often get 100% attendance. And furthermore, there in the quorum part, we look at remote attendance and the ability of the council to have certain meetings being held by remote attendance. The power that the council has to do that comes from the local government measure, and at the moment the council must have at least 30% people present, physically present within the chamber for a committee to be held remotely, so for members to attend it remotely. That's the minimum that that the measure says a council must have. And then in the next paragraph of standing orders, paragraph 9, I look at remote attendance, and as I say, this month the council adopted the ability of the council to have meetings via remote attendance, and have amended some of the standing orders to allow that to take effect. Of interest there is paragraph 9.2. So if a member wants to attend a meeting remotely, they must give at least 4 days' notice to the head of Democratic Services. So the head of Democratic Services then needs to make the necessary arrangements, and in particular to satisfy herself that the technology is available for remote attendance to take place. Paragraph 9.3 there, I cover off what happens if the technology fails, and the way that we're going to deal with that is that the chairman is basically the chair's discretion, will consider whether or not to postpone the meeting or for the meeting to carry on. So that's how we've dealt with remote attendance there.
Sorry, Rob, can I just a quick question on
Certainly.
that? My internet is off more than it's on. So for councillors who are really dependent on this, what sort of support does the council give to them?
I don't know whether you've got anything on that, John, but do you want me to give sort of my take on it first? We are very, very dependent on the technology being able to cope with remote attendance, and my hunch is that if, for example, your internet connection or a member's internet connection is insufficient, then clearly they won't be able to have remote attendance. I think that's a bigger problem. Internet connection is a bigger problem than I think the council can control, sadly. So that is a real difficulty that the council, and indeed certain members here, highlighted that during the debate on remote attendance. That it's a great idea in theory, that so for example, members can still take part in the democratic process without actually physically coming to this chamber. Great, I think everybody, the vast majority of people would say, yeah, that's a wonderful idea. But if the technology isn't going to allow you to do that, it becomes very, very difficult. And I would suggest very, very frustrating for that member or members who want to remotely attend to take advantage of this. I don't know whether you've got anything to add there, John.
Yeah, I think what I'll add in is that we're not talking about just from home. I think a big driver for this coming from the members who want to do remote attendance is being able to remote in from their place of work, which would generally have a much more reliable internet connection than some of the places in Monmouthshire. So there's different facets to it and different aspects of where members are coming from. Some members have made it quite clear during the consultation that they just don't want to remote attend. They think we should remain as coming along to meetings. There isn't another authority, definitely in Wales, that is looking at taking up remote attendance. So we're really piloting it and trialing it, and some of those issues or some things will come across, what the connections are like at home. But the big driver from the members who want to remote attend in is from work, where generally the connections are going to be stronger anyway.
I noticed it says there that the member must be able to be seen and heard as well. So you're relying on video, you can't just telephone into a meeting. Yeah. There's something quite important there, isn't there, in the needing to be seen. So are you using Skype or something like that to try and bring people in?
Yeah. we're using Skype to do it. There isn't a set package off the shelf we can go out and buy for remote attendance at meetings. It's just not there. We're using some of the functionality that's built into Skype for Business to be able to bring members into the meetings. We've trialled it once. It worked. We had three, I think, people remoting in at once. One was in Cardiff, 2 were in here, just in case it fell down and they could come down and join in the meeting. They can be, the videos on YouTube, by all means go and have a look at it. There's another facet off the back of it as well, is the requirement on the local authority is to provide live streaming of meetings. So we then have to provide a live stream of that remote attendance into the meeting as well. So you can see the people who are remoting into the meeting on the stream as well. But yeah, it's complex, and we're trialing it, and we'll see how it goes, and we're gonna keep on trialing it because the functionalities there. Some members do want it. I think for some meetings like cabinet, it's a great idea. You know, it's more of a, these are our decisions rather than an open conversation. Whether it'll work in an open conversation room, we're yet to find out, but we'll see how it goes.
On that, John referred to what other councils are doing. My research, other councils in Wales are certainly not using remote attendance for council or cabinet meetings, but I think some councils have used, it might not be a regular occurrence, but they have used it for some select committees, and I think a Democratic Services Committee, I think one council did. But it's certainly not been adopted wholesale by councils in Wales. When one bears in mind that this power came into being in 2011, it came in with a local government measure from 2011. So, as I say, we're certainly the first council to be considering this for full council and cabinet. So brave new world, indeed. Moving on. Sorry.
Richard.
Yes, it's a question both for John and Rob, really. Do you think the remote attendance raises any potential conduct ethical issues, particularly for the regulatory committees? I'm just being a bit suspicious as a member of the public here that, let's say, planning, someone could remote attend planning. What is there to stop them having the agent for the applicant sat out of sight in their living room, passing them notes and questions to ask and making comments? And so, in effect, they're taking being heavily influenced in a way that no one can observe and that couldn't happen at all in a real planning committee or a licensing committee where there can be so much at stake.
Perhaps I'll deal with that. Yeah. If, for example, the committee was dealing with things in committee session, right, so press and public excluded, if that member was remotely attending, they would similarly have to be on their own taking part in the meeting, okay? No other member of the public could be there, no member of the family, for example, certainly no member of the press. So that's an issue that I've thought about, how we're going to sort of police that. That's so again, that's, I think, education, training comes in on that. As regards a planning agent, if you like, passing notes, etc., to a planning committee member. Again, I think it does come down to some training there, and just explaining to members, look, that isn't permitted within the physical chamber if you were here at a normal planning meeting. So what you do remotely should be replicated what you do physically in the chamber. So I think there is an element of trust here, Richard, but there's certainly an element as well of education and training on good governance and decision making. But it's certainly a good point. And perhaps if that ever happened, heaven forbid, you would sort of perhaps get the impression by some of the questions that were coming from this member who was remotely attending, what was happening. I don't know, as I say, it's conjecture, but it's a good point and something that we will need to consider as a council and to protect against.
What I think Rob's been pretty clear with the members through all the time we've been speaking to them is that the code of conduct still applies to them, no matter whether they're remote or in the room, it's still there. But these are some of the other things that we still haven't worked out yet. How does a chair maintain control of a meeting when they've got 3 or 4 people remoting into it? Voting, how do we ensure that their vote isn't made public? But the chairman or Rob has logged it along with everybody else in the room. The other thing we haven't come across is what if a chair doesn't want to use remote attendance at their meeting? We haven't even crossed those bridges yet. What we've trialled it in is cabinet, who were pushing for it. But once we start to filter it down, if a chair doesn't want to use remote attendance at that meeting, how do we deal with that? There's lots of questions yet.
I think in that situation, if a chairman or chairperson rather didn't wish to have their meeting remotely attended, then it wouldn't be remotely attended. I think I think that would be the case there, because don't forget, as the standing orders are currently drafted, a member wishing to remotely attend must notify the head of democratic services, so the deputy chief exec, I would like to remotely attend, and then if you like, the decision is very much, or the ball is very much in the head of democratic services court there, and one of the considerations would be, I suggest, to speak to the chairman. Look, I've had a request from Councillor A. He or she would like to remotely attend. What do you think about that? Well, clearly, if the chair says, no way am I allowing remote attendance, then I don't think it gets past first base. But what could happen then, of course, is that maybe that other councillors other members of that committee would say, well, look, let's have remote attendance, and there will be a bit of a few difficulties, if you like, then for the chair to hold that line. So we are very much going into uncharted waters here, and it'll be interesting to see if we ever get a technical fix to it, how it resolves itself. But I think it's right, in fairness, that the Constitution is amended to at least to allow this. It's a permissive right, if you like. It can be done, providing a number of factors are taken into account.
Well done for piloting it anyway, given it.
End up getting JR'd, I may not be quite as happy, but yeah. It'll be good, yeah.
Thank you for that, Rob. Just to confirm that the next meeting will be in here, not remote attendance.
Yes. Okay. Nearly to the end now, members. Thankfully. So I'm looking at page 33D now, which are the executive procedure rules. So these are the rules that the cabinet is governed by, the rules of the procedural rules, and you will see that again I've had to include remote attendance in there. So it's paragraph 1.9. To take into account, look, if cabinet wants to remotely attend, then that would be possible. And then the final thing I wanted to say was just drawing your attention to the fact that the up-to-date code, if I can find it, our code of conduct is now included within the Constitution. So that's all sort of present and correct there. Let me just get to that page. And I'm there. Here we are. There we are. So it's at section E. So starts on E1, and that's the new or the updated Constitution. Code of conduct for members that that council adopted, and I think on there I've put the date it was adopted. I think, if memory serves me right, it was May last year. Yeah. Let's just go to the end. It was, is it? 2016. It's 2016. Great. So, Chairman, that's a sort of a whistle-stop tour of the Constitution. I hope that, and I hope the councillors at their meeting next month will also. It's not as sort of daunting a document as at first it may appear, because there are a number of policies and procedures in it, and I think if you know what you're looking for, it's quite easy to get to the correct part of the Constitution. But as I say, quite happy to take any questions whatsoever about the Constitution, and I hope that's been useful.
Yes, thank you, Rob. That's much appreciated. It is an awful lot to wade through. So, questions, please, Richard.
Yeah, Rob, I just wondered if the section B was the scheme of delegation for decision making by planning, which in the version we got, the whole thing was highlighted out, which could have meant you assumed it was all new, like the remote attendance, but I don't think it is, and I'm just interested in what changes have been made there and why. In particular, I'm aware from before that these things, delegation panels, can be seen by the public as sort of contentious because of the transparency issues, because they're often having closed meetings with decisions may or may not be recorded. And also they do raise issues about predetermination and things like that. So could you summarise what the changes being made to do with delegation in planning? Because this is particularly with contentious applications. Thank you.
Yeah, by all means. And thanks for drawing that to my attention, Richard. What I'll do, I'll rather than highlight it all, I'll just highlight the bits for next month's meeting, just to show. So it's been changed primarily to take into account some sort of legislative changes, and I can show you what those sort of changes are, because I've got them on a paper copy here. So I can do that, and also furthermore, again, there are job title changes, which again need to be reflected within, so that the officer can make a decision. Now, interestingly, we've got a panel here that that makes decisions, can make planning decisions. So the more important, the more major decisions will always come to the planning committee to hear. But the vast majority of decisions are made by officers, because they're what we call householder applications. So they tend to be made by officers. And I forget the percentage, but it is a huge percentage, mostly done by officers. A local member here at the council can ask that a particular application is heard comes before planning committee, or can go to the delegation panel. And the delegation panel is made up of the chair and vice chairman of planning committee and the opposition spokesperson. who's a chap, Councillor Harris, a very experienced planning member here. The good thing about our delegation panel, I suggest, is that they will meet the applicant, they will meet the members of the public, any objectors. So they have a site visit to get a feel, if you like, of what the application is about. And if they're not content to make make a decision, they'll ask that it be referred back to planning committee. So there are some sort of safeguards in place here that allow the delegation panel to function. In my view, it functions very well because the 3 members are very, very experienced planning committee members. And if there's anything that they're not content with, there's always an option, and this indeed does happen, that the matter comes back to planning committee. David's a member of planning committee, and that sort of goes the other way as well. So, for example, if an application was being considered by planning committee and there was a certain aspect that planning committee members weren't totally happy with, they sometimes allow the delegation panel to take the decision on that particular point, and that could be something like house colour, finish colour. So the delegation panel will see the palette of colours available, and then then take the decision on the back of what planning committees allowed. As you're aware, Richard, planning can be extremely controversial, and it's no different. We live in a beautiful county, and it can be rather controversial here, and particularly with the demands being made on the planning system for house numbers to increase, house building numbers to increase, and I think that's just that those targets are going to increase. I think, which again potentially puts the system into conflict with objectives.
Thank you for that. Jane, you had a question.
Thank you very much, Chair. At the beginning of the meeting, you rightly referenced watching the committee meeting online and how frustrating it was when people don't use their microphone. I would like to raise the issue of something that happens in the chamber, which is the abuse of the microphone by certain members. And equally, this can be very frustrating for people at home when, unfortunately, there are people that will manipulate the microphone system and detract from the person that's trying to speak by pressing the button. I don't know whether I've missed it, but is there anything in the Code of Conduct that refers to, live streaming and how council members should behave in the chamber? We're in a very fast-moving world, and I'm sure that all these things are going to change very rapidly. And I think it's really important that we recognise that in our Code of Conduct. Thank you.
Okay. There's nothing in the Code of Conduct per se about the use of microphones, for example, and that, my view is very much within the gift of the chair at the respective committee to just point out, and indeed, if this needs to be done time and time again, then it's worth doing it. And in fairness to the chairs, they tend to do it, so because there are particular members. I don't think it's done deliberately, is my own view, but I don't know. It could be, I don't know. But I just think that some people are just a little bit forgetful about turning on and off their microphones. But it's but as I say, I think that's very much within the power, the gift of the chair to get across to members. Look, you speak, you put your microphone on, and when you finish speaking, you turn it off. And if that becomes, if you like, a real issue, then that could be escalated to perhaps the group leaders. I must admit, I can't ever see the Ombudsman being interested in the sort of use of microphones, frankly, because that, as I see it, that very much is an internal almost a sort of a member-on-member complaint, if you like, that we ought to be able to resolve as a council ourselves. But as I say, my take on it is that it's very much the duty of the chairman to remind members not to abuse their microphones.
Thank you. I mean, if I can just come back, I would say that I do think, sadly, that there are people that do manipulate the system. And I think if anybody watches our last council meeting and the standard of debate and really the interruptions were, in my opinion, and we are talking about standards in this council chamber, were wholly unacceptable. And I do hope that the training in the new year will, in fact, highlight what is acceptable. And if we're going to have good debate in this chamber, then we need to have those standards in place. Thank you.
I totally agree with that. Is that, and in fairness, I think the chief executive says this as well. It's very important that members, the way they conduct themselves at full council meetings, because if you like, it's the blue ribbon meeting of the council. And if it's seen to be petty, etc., behaviour not particularly good, that doesn't reflect well on the council as a whole. And I'm confident there are members of the public within the county will sort of make that known to their respective members. And that is in some ways a useful mechanism for live streaming. You know, it does give a discipline, I think, because members of the public don't have to be here to experience what goes on. They can, hear it from the comfort of their own laptop. So that's interesting, yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how we go at our next month's meeting, and whether behaviour improves, because it was noticeably worse for whatever reason this month. I think the meeting before was excellent, and I think across the board it was felt that way. But whatever happened this time, things didn't go to plan, so to speak.
Thank you for that.
I think, sorry, just to support Rob's comment there on it's up to the chairman to control order at the meeting. On the chairman's microphone has got a kill switch, so it can mute everybody's microphones and cameras. They don't tend to use it. I think generally they don't need to, but perhaps in the instance at the last meeting it would have been helpful if they did at certain times. But it's the tools are there to support them if they want it.
Thank you for that, John. Irene.
Just following on from that, we did talk about this committee actually attending as sort of oversight on some of the committees, and following on from what's been said, I think I'd find it very interesting.
I think that's a good idea, yes.
There's absolutely no, you can do that, Maureen, absolutely. Physically coming here, or sort of, viewing it through your laptop. But absolutely no reason why you shouldn't do that. Yeah. I
just feel if they were aware that members were sitting in, it might make a point.
I've got to say, I attended one of the council meetings, and Rob told them that I was attending, and they were incredibly well behaved on that. Okay. Are there any more questions on this? Mark.
Please, Chair. Mark Sutton, Independent. It's going back to training, unfortunately, Rob. The new whistleblowing policy, which you've highlighted in the new constitution, is it training for managers and staff?
Yes, there is. This was done relatively recently. This whistleblowing policy came to council to be adopted. So there is a regime, if you like, of training now on this new policy, in particular for members. Because as I say, the big change is that it's a universal policy now that covers the schools as well. In the past, we had two systems, which was a little bit difficult because sometimes the issue, if you like, affected both the council and the school. and so we had these separate regimes. So it's better from that point of view. But there is some training, Mark, yes, in place. The instances of whistleblowing are quite rare, is my impression. But again, I don't think we sort of. I think that's pretty much the way across the 22 councils. But obviously, very important document, and employees must feel comfortable in being able to bring things to the powers that be, bring it to their attention and make sure things are done. Yeah. Thank you.
One more question.
Thank you. Just an observation. I'm sitting here thinking how useful this has all been, the explanation about the Constitution and the changes. And I think perhaps for new members it might be useful to hear it, but maybe a simple email to everybody saying if they watch this seminar, this meeting, that there's an awful lot of information about the Constitution which might help people before the next full council meeting, rather than have to do separate training.
That's an excellent idea, Sheila, thank you. And perhaps, Nicola, we can arrange to do that. Yeah.
Okay, are there one final question? Anyone? Okay, thank you very much. So that brings us to the end of the meeting. I'd like to thank everyone for attending, good attendance today. And the next meeting will be Monday the 19th of March 2018 at 10 a.m. So a happy Christmas and a Merry New Year to everyone.